I have video for you today of Donald Trump devolving into an incoherent sort of stream of consciousness rant after CNN reporter Caitlin Collins pressed him about how, hey, you said Mexico was going to pay for the wall. They're clearly not. Have you failed on that? And I want to really set this up properly for you before we look at the video. Trump said during his 2016 presidential campaign, time and again, I'm going to build a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, and Mexico is going to pay for it. Now, it was never happening. Only the least informed Trumpist could possibly have believed that Mexico was going to pay for the wall. And over time, it became more and more clear that, yeah, Mexico is not going to pay for this wall. They were never going to pay for the wall. So Trump has started to look for funding in other places. He wants funding from you, right, the taxpayer, to pay for that wall. He threatened to shut down government over funding for the wall. Then he actually shut down government over funding for the wall, a government that is still shut down. So Caitlin Collins did a totally reasonable thing, which is say, hey, you know, what about that Mexico is going to pay for the wall thing? And Trump, of course, immediately becomes condescending towards her. And then it gets hilarious when Trump goes into this incoherent rant. And I'll explain what Trump is trying to talk about here, but failing to actually explain after we watch it. Again, Trump trying to use language to communicate something of meaning, failing miserably. It's hard to watch. It's hard to listen to, but check it out. And remember, the question is, what about Mexico paying for the wall? Trump doesn't answer. He goes on a rant about concrete and steel. It's a long clip, but stick with it, because what's important is he talks for nearly 3 minutes and doesn't answer the question. You'll also hear him sniffing a lot.
You ran your campaign promising supporters that Mexico is going to pay for the wall and that the wall was going to be made of concrete. You just said earlier that the wall could be made of steel, and right now our government is shut down over a demand from your administration that the American taxpayer pay for the wall. So how can you say you're not failing on that promise to your supporters?
Very nice question, so beautifully asked, even though I just answered it.
You didn't answer.
Look, let me just tell you, excuse me,
Yet,
you ready? Are you ready? I just told you that we just made a trade deal, and we will take in billions and billions of dollars, far more than the cost of the wall. The wall is peanuts compared to what the value of this trade deal is to the United States. As far as concrete, I said I was going to build a wall. I never said, I'm going to build a concrete. I said I'm going to build a wall.
You said concrete.
Just so you don't, because I know you're not into the construction business, you don't understand something. We now have a great steel business that's rebuilt in the United States. Steel is stronger than concrete. If I build this wall or fence or anything the Democrats need to call it, because I'm not into names, I'm into production. I'm into something that works. If I build a steel wall rather than a concrete wall, it will actually be stronger than a concrete. Steel is stronger than concrete, okay? In case you can check it out. Listen, if I build a wall and the wall is made out of steel instead of concrete, I think people will like that. And here's the other good thing. I'll have it done by the United States Steel Corporation, by companies in our country that are now powerful, great companies again. And they become powerful over the last 2 years because of me and because of our trade policies. So if I have a steel wall, or you could call it a steel fence, but it'll be more powerful than any of the concrete walls that we're talking about. It's possible that it will look better. And one of the things, I think you have seen this, that's very important for us, very, very important, in speaking to Border Patrol, ICE, and actually local law enforcement, and even military, they want to be able to see through it. You can't really see through a concrete wall. They want to be able to see who's on the other side of the wall. Because if they're here and you have about a 12-inch concrete wall and you have people on the other side, but you can't see what's over there, it's very dangerous. They want to be able to see through the wall. A see-through wall made out of steel is far stronger than a concrete wall. So I'm very happy with it. I think, I'm not sure, but I think that's what the Democrats prefer. And if it can get them there, I'm okay. It actually will be a more powerful wall, and it will be a more beautiful wall than having a concrete wall.
So if the new trade deal, Mr. President,
Jeff,
President,
go ahead.
if the new trade deal
So no answer there about in 2 minutes and 54 seconds about Mexico paying for the wall. Caitlin Collins trying to follow up about that, about the trade deal lie, and the microphone given to somebody else. So let me explain that trade deal thing. Trump has started floating this harebrained explanation that even if Mexico doesn't give us the money for the wall or pay for the wall to be built, that because of Trump's new trade deal, they sort of are paying for it. This is the idea, and I've tried to explain it before. And concisely, the idea is if the wall costs $25 billion and the modified trade deal with Mexico leaves an extra $25 billion to the United States, that this is sort of like Mexico paid for it. Now, this is dumb for many reasons. One being that money from trade deals doesn't become available as cash for a wall. You still have to separately fund the wall. The political decision has to be made to fund the wall. And it's a pretty big stretch to say that that would even count remotely as Mexico paying for it. But the more important thing is, if you do a deal that changes the trade balance by $25 billion, that's not $25 billion to the government that they can use to buy stuff or build a wall. That's $25 billion in trade balance for American companies. The government doesn't get the $25 billion, Pat. And this idea has gone completely off the rails.
And there's one more layer here, too, which is if Trump thinks that Mexico is paying for the wall through the new trade deals, then why do the American taxpayers have to pay for it? Why is he shutting the government down over this? Isn't Mexico paying for the wall under this explanation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's almost like he's saying we need formally the money to be authorized, but then we're getting it back or something. I mean, it's completely incoherent. And the fact that it took him 3 minutes to not answer that question, effectively filibustering his own press conference, tells us that the guy is standing on, to call it shaky ground would be an overstatement. Absolutely meaningless, ridiculous idea, repeating nonsense until the reporter just gives up and the microphone is handed to somebody else or the press conference ends. In this case, just moving on and talking to somebody else. Just pathetic, absolutely pathetic. Let's talk about Donald Trump's commandeering of American television to propagandize about the border wall over which he shut down the government last night. We will talk about the content of this address. I mentioned yesterday during a live stream that I did covering this and also earlier on yesterday's show that there are really kind of three issues here. Number one is there actually an undocumented immigration crisis? I laid out the case yesterday for why there is not. Secondly, if there were such an immigration crisis, would the wall that Donald Trump is proposing be the solution to that crisis? I explained why it would not. And then issue number three, layer number three was, would a presidential address of this type in prime time on television be the right place for overt political lobbying for the policy that Donald Trump wants? And I also made the case that it was not. And the speech in the end was 9 minutes long, half just lies at a rate that we maybe have not seen previously during a Trump speech. The other half just anecdotal appeals to emotion. And I'm not going to focus too much on those because I think our audience mostly understands that you don't make policy based on anecdotal appeals to emotion. But we should talk about the lies that were told because that actually is important. But the primary takeaway is this address never should have happened. It was purely political. It was a lobbying speech. I actually would be okay with a presidential address in prime time on all TV networks for lobbying the public about a real emergency or a crisis, right? We have a climate change emergency on our planet. If we had a president say, I'm going to address the American people because of the crisis that is climate change and what we're doing to our planet, that would actually make sense because it's real. A real crisis could be we've got a president who's an accused serial sex assaulter with at least one child accuser. That is more of a crisis than the crisis of undocumented immigrants coming over the U.S.-Mexico border. So there are many ways in which I would support a president saying, I need to address the nation tonight. This is not one of them. And most of the lies that Trump told were told up front. I'll go through a few of them. I'm not going to play the 9-minute thing because it's only 9 minutes and it's very easy to find. I'll focus just on analyzing the lies that were told. Donald Trump called this, he sort of opened this thing yesterday, calling it a growing crisis. And as I've already outlined, it's not a crisis at all, but it's definitely not growing. There's no evidence that this is a growing problem. Border crossings are lower and lower and lower each year, dating all the way back to the year 2000. There has been an increase in the last few months, but that's mostly asylum seekers who are people going through the correct legal process to ask for asylum in the United States. Donald Trump said we don't have any way of returning people to where they came from quickly. Quickly is subjective, but we do have a mechanism for doing that. However, the fact that Trump has shut down government is actually what's slowing that process down, making it so that immigration hearings have slowed down to an absolute halt. Trump arguing that we are really hurt economically, that this is a strain on resources, undocumented immigrants. That does not appear to be true. Undocumented immigrants pay in to social welfare programs from which they will never get money back out. They are single-handedly holding on their backs and shoulders multiple industries which would collapse without them. And most importantly, Donald Trump made the case that economically undocumented immigration is hurting the United States because undocumented immigrants drive wages down. What is an amazing ruse about that is that it's the corporations who want to pay lower wages that are the ones benefiting from that. And it's an unbelievably brazen act of misplaced ire to be mad at the people coming here to work for a better life than the corporations that take advantage of them and choose to hire undocumented immigrants without being punished. If we started enforcing penalties on corporations that hire undocumented immigrants, you would solve an overwhelming majority of the problem. If corporations weren't known to hire undocumented immigrants, then you wouldn't have so many people getting jobs and looking for jobs. It would be a problem that in great part would fix itself. Then Trump talked about Americans are dying from drugs that are coming over the U.S.-Mexico border. Listen, it's true that Americans are dying from drugs, but that's not coming exclusively because of drugs coming over the U.S.-Mexico border. A lot of it is marijuana, first of all, which nobody is dying from. And secondly, according to the DEA, it's mostly being smuggled through ports of entry, not through the parts of the border which would be blocked with Trump's border wall. Okay, understand that. Most of the drugs coming into the United States from Mexico are coming hidden and smuggled in vehicles and on persons through the actual legitimate on-the-record ports of entry, meaning a wall wouldn't do anything about it. Donald Trump is saying that thousands of Americans are being killed by undocumented immigrants yearly. I was not able to find data that supports that, although I'm open to having my mind changed. Trump insisting that it's a humanitarian crisis. Well, just saying that doesn't actually make it so. And then Trump starting to move into the appeal to emotion phase of his address by saying women and children are the biggest victims of undocumented immigration. That is true, but women and children are always the biggest victims, period, all over the world from all sorts of circumstances. That doesn't justify a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, and it doesn't prove that we have an undocumented immigration crisis. Donald Trump deliberately conflated border security and a $25 billion wall or $35 billion wall by the time it's all said and done. And what's really important to understand there is that it's untrue what Trump said, that Democrats aren't willing to fund border security. Democrats have actually been willing to provide border security funding, not for the wall, but for technology and staffing, in exchange for reopening government. And it's Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump who have refused to give any of those bills any serious consideration. It is untrue also that everybody wanted a wall until Trump was president, and all of a sudden they don't, just because as a Democrat you might have been willing years ago to give Republicans some border fencing, a few miles of it, in exchange for things you wanted, doesn't mean you're a hypocrite because you now don't want a $25, 30, or $35 billion wall across the entire border. So big picture, you have a government that is not shut down because of Democrats. Trump shut it down. You have a president who has failed to get what he wants and is now throwing a literal temper tantrum, which caused him to commandeer television networks for 9 minutes plus the lead-up coverage and the Pelosi-Schumer follow-up speech and the analysis of it for several hours across multiple networks. And most importantly, there is no crisis. And at least for now, Pat, there's no indication that this address has really moved the needle for Donald Trump.
Well, we'll see. I think this comes across as effective propaganda, honestly, because you have the president on his own turf in the Oval Office, delivering a speech to the nation, calling the immigration situation a crisis, calling it an emergency. I think that's going to be effective. So, people just tuning into their local programming on CBS or NBC, wanting to watch their favorite show, they may not follow politics that closely. They may not stick around and hear the fact checks, hear the responses given by Pelosi and Schumer. And, at this moment, a majority or at least a plurality of Americans blame Trump for the shutdown. I would not be surprised if in the coming days we see that that's flipped a little bit.
Those numbers may shift, but you're already starting to see even conservative political analysts say it looks like Trump is going to fail and he's going to have to relent and allow government to be reopened. We will talk a little bit more about that. But in the short term, I don't see this helping Donald Trump. It came off as so not credible. It came off as so flaccid and beta in every way. And it also may have been an illegal use of government resources for Trump's campaign, because minutes before the speech, the Re-elect Trump campaign sent out an email asking for donations on the basis of the immigration crisis and previewing Trump's speech. And if you consider that sort of part of Trump's campaign, this was a political speech used in this manner to help his campaign. And there are possible ways in that may have even violated campaign finance law, although I wouldn't expect him to be held accountable for it. We will follow it and see what the impact is. There's a Jonathan Chait article in New York Magazine called "Trump Literally Did Not Understand What a Shutdown Would Do." And it points out that the shutdown continues. We're now beyond 2 weeks. And it's increasingly clear that much like Donald Trump's tariffs, Donald Trump, number one, doesn't understand what a shutdown actually is. And number two, Donald Trump has no plan for getting out of the shutdown, because now it's this situation where Democrats just don't want to give him the money for the wall, period, because they think it's bad policy. And Trump can't appear to be the weak guy by accepting an end to the shutdown without money for the wall. So we get to where we are now, which is a presidential address tonight, possibly to declare a national emergency in justifying seizing money for that wall. So we end up with Trump saying he'd be fine with months or years of a shutdown if that's what it takes. And I've mentioned before that most of the government isn't actually shut down during the shutdown. But some stuff actually is shut down, and shut down with consequence. So, for example, the Washington Post is now reporting that the Trump administration didn't realize that during a government shutdown, 38 million Americans lose their food stamps. During a shutdown, thousands of tenants could be evicted without the help that they would otherwise be able to get from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Washington Post explains that the Trump administration is only now realizing that this happens. And now they're trying to figure out, without ending the shutdown, how can we help some of these people who are being hit really hard by the effects of the shutdown that we've decided to do. Knowing Trump, he likely was thinking back to that short few days of shutdown in early 2018. And he thought not much really happened, so not much will happen if this lasts weeks or months or whatever. Except after a few days, things do actually start to go haywire. People going hungry. Not having food stamps means they'll stop spending money, their food stamp money, at grocery stores, which is bad for the grocery stores. You've got the TSA working without pay and starting to stage days where they all call out sick. This could spill over and impact air travel, which would cripple industries. Tax refunds will be in jeopardy once the filing window opens in February and people can start filing their taxes and expecting refunds. What will happen when people can't get their tax refunds because government is shut down? And just like with the tariffs, there was no thinking before the shutdown about how it would work. There's also no thinking about what the off-ramp is. And I think it's important to mention as well, Mitch McConnell has to be blamed. It's not just Trump. Unlike Trump, Mitch McConnell does know how government shutdowns work, and he's refusing to put up bills to a vote to reopen government. So this might not accomplish anything either way. Trump might not care if McConnell wants to reopen government. But if we actually had Republicans, other than like the lone couple of voices that are out there saying we should reopen government, if Republicans and Democrats were pushing for a reopening of government without necessarily having to fund the wall, it maybe would serve as some pressure on Donald Trump. Would a red state airport shutting down be what it takes to get government reopened, Pat? Maybe. But what's increasingly clear is that he doesn't even understand the consequences of his actions. And the only lens through which he makes these decisions is the political lens and the lens of, will I seem like the winner or the loser in the end?
Yeah, government shutdown is very serious, especially once it gets into weeks and months into that time range. And House Democrats have tried to pass several bills that would reopen parts of the government, like agriculture and the Treasury and Justice Department, the stuff that has nothing to do with the wall. Like, you can save that conversation for later, keep the debate going on whether or not we should have a wall and whether or not we should fund the Department of Homeland Security until that debate's over with. But Republicans are having none of it, of course.
Republicans having none of it. And of course, the House Democrats within hours of taking control of the House, passing a bill that would have reopened government. But McConnell's not hearing it. Trump's not hearing it. So anyway, Trump didn't know what would happen during a shutdown. He probably still doesn't even really get it. And all that matters is, will he come away feeling that he won, or will he come away feeling that he lost? Nothing else will matter. Not the people going hungry, not the fact that this could cripple air travel. None of it makes a difference to him. It is truly Idiocracy 2019. Send me your thoughts. How long will this go on? What will it take to end the shutdown? I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and we have just a tremendous program for you today. Okay, the new Democratic Congress has been sworn in. Democrats control the House. Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House, and we're already seeing Republicans triggered by Democratic ideas. And today we're going to dig deep into first-term Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's idea. It's not yet a proposal, just an idea of a 70% top marginal tax rate on the super wealthy, specifically to take that money and fund programs that are included in, including, I guess I would say, the Green New Deal, which we've been hearing about. And there is so much to talk about here. And there are kind of three layers to this thing. Okay. First of all, what's the proposal? How much tax on who and to pay for what? That's part one. Secondly, what historical data do we have about what happens when you stick these high marginal tax rates on the very wealthy? And then number three, this is the most fun part. Do Republicans not understand how marginal tax rates work, or are they deliberately lying in order to confuse people about them? So stick with me until the end, because that's a sort of key part of this entire thing. So last night in an interview with 60 Minutes, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez suggested that maybe we should be looking at a top marginal tax rate of around 70% used to fund the Green New Deal and other proposals, other programs, and to get rid of fossil fuel within 12 years. Very ambitious goal. I'm not going to play the clip from CBS because they've been extra aggressive lately with what I believe is fair use of their clips, but I don't want to put our YouTube channel at risk, so we are just going to read to you a little bit about what she said about this 70% top marginal tax rate in her interview with Anderson Cooper. Quote, "What is the problem with trying to push our technological capacities to the furthest extent possible? There's an element where, yeah, people are going to have to start paying their fair share in taxes. I think that it only has ever been radicals that have changed this country. Yeah, if that's what radical means, call me a radical." So, of course, this is a top marginal tax rate, meaning that you would see a progressively higher tax as income goes up. The right likes to say, when it comes to sort of understanding the underlying philosophies of taxation, the right likes to say that taxes should be low on the rich because they create jobs, because the rich having more money trickles down to the lower economy, and it raises all boats like a rising tide. This is called effectively supply side economics. The left, and people who understand reality, quite frankly, understand that there is a diminishing marginal utility to dollars. What that means is if you have $10 to your name, an additional $10 doubles your net worth. That's huge. If you have $100 to your name, an additional $10 is useful, but it's not as useful to you as to the person who only has $10 to begin with. If you have $1 million, $10 is nothing, right? It's interest on a savings account. It's a rounding error. It's nothing. And in the same way, the more money you have, the more likely you are to just let any extra money that you obtain sit in a savings account, which is not stimulative to the economy as much as giving the money to poorer people would be, who would be more likely to spend the money and inject it into the economy. This is called demand side economics. At a certain point, the marginal utility of another dollar is zero. If you're Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or Mark Zuckerberg and you have billions of dollars, a 1 percentage point increase in your taxes, which leaves you with 1 percentage point less money at the end of the year, it has zero impact on your life. Maybe it's not literally zero, but it's 0.00001% of each dollar actually impacts your life and your financial decisions in any way. That is what a higher top marginal tax rate capitalizes on, that for the very rich, those additional dollars do nothing for them, but they would do a lot for other people, for the economy, for social programs, etc. So now that we understand the idea, let's look at the data about the history of these very high or higher top marginal tax rates. The US used to have more tax brackets, and they used to have higher tax brackets at the top. So under Dwight D. Eisenhower as president, the top tax bracket was 91%. This went down to 50% under Reagan. This went down to 38% after the 1986 tax reform. With more tax brackets, you can have different top marginal tax rates for someone earning $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, 10 million, 100 million. Right now, everybody earning over 510 or so $1,000 a year pays 37%. Okay, that's it. The highest bracket starts at $510,000 in income, and there's nothing else above that. It's 37% all the way up. So then we get to, what does policy and economic research tell us the top marginal tax rate should be? Well, the question is, what are you trying to achieve? The right is correct when they say, if you keep raising that top tax rate, at a certain point, it will stop people from working at all, which the government doesn't want, because then they make zero, right? So if you go too high, it actually reduces government revenue. What MIT research has found is that a top marginal tax rate of 73% is the point at which the government will maximize revenue by taking advantage of that very high end for whom those additional dollars have very little utility. There's complex math around it, which we don't need to get into, but the point is, a top marginal tax rate of 70%, as sort of floated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if you set it up with the correct brackets, would be something that raises a ton of money for programs that would actually improve our society. So that is the sort of history of the tax brackets. Now, lastly, some Republicans seem to not understand that this is just a marginal tax rate. It's not the rate anybody pays on all their income. So as an example, Republican Congressman Steve Scalise tweeted over the weekend about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's interview with 60 Minutes, where she talked about this. He said, Republicans, let Americans keep more of their own hard-earned money. Democrats, take away 70% of your income and give it to leftist fantasy programs. No one wants to take 70% of your money based on a 70% top marginal tax rate, okay? Everybody pays the same rate on the first $510,000 that they earn. You then put in place higher rates for money earned beyond that. Now, I don't know if Steve Scalise and other Republicans who are saying this stuff, I don't know if they don't understand how marginal tax rates work, or if they're deliberately playing dumb to incite their followers. But let's explain it really, really simply, okay? I put together the 2019 actual tax brackets with some hypothetical higher tax brackets that would get us up to 70% marginal tax, okay? So in reality right now, everybody pays 10% on income up to $9,700. Everybody. Doesn't matter if you made $1 million or $10 million. On your first $9,700, you pay 10%. Likewise, you have rates of 12, 22, 24, 32, 35, and 37% on other income ranges. So if you make $100,000 a year, you pay 22% on everything between 40 and 85,000. And then for what you earn between it's exactly 84,201 and 100,000, you pay 24%. On your first $84,000 in income, you pay the same as everybody who makes less than you and everybody who makes more than you. So the way that you could set up a tax bracket system, the way Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing, is that maybe you pay 37% on income between $510,000 and $1 million. And then for income between 1 and 10 million, you pay 45%. For income between 10 and 50 million, you pay 58%. And then you pay 70% tax only on your income above $50 million a year. So if you earn $12 million, you pay that 58% rate only on what you make between 10 and $12 million. Again, this is hypothetical. This is how marginal tax rates work. This is kind of like debt and deficit. I can't believe we're having this conversation and that I have to explain to people that the way the right is talking about this stuff is either ignorant or, I guess you would say, deliberately ignorant in order to mislead you. The idea that someone is going to swoop in and say, you now give me 70% of all your income, that's not how marginal tax brackets work. My question to you, do they know this? And they're playing dumb in order to fire up their followers to say AOC wants to take all your money? Or do they not understand how marginal tax rates work? Send me your thoughts. Send me your thoughts on our Instagram page. Well, we will be posting a clip from this show, David Pakman Show on Instagram. Follow me, David.Pakman. Quick break, back after this. Donald Trump is going to be commandeering all of television, or at least all of it that has decided to go along with this very obvious publicity stunt that he's doing, with the goal of fear-mongering about the non-existent immigration crisis that Trump has fabricated in order to justify taking money, potentially through the use of a national emergency declaration for his U.S.-Mexico border wall, over which he has already shut down the government. And most media outlets are effectively complicit in this. And I'll talk about that, how that works in a second. From the beginning of Trump's campaign, he fear-mongered around immigration. You'll remember Mexico sending rapists and criminals who bring drugs and crime. We will shut down Muslim immigration until we can figure out what the hell is going on. We want people from Norway, not from shithole countries like Haiti. You can say that now because it's quoting the president. We will build a wall and Mexico will pay for it. And then it became clear that Mexico was never going to pay. So Trump instead demanded money from you, the taxpayer. He couldn't get it, so he shut down the government, which has now gone on for more than 2 weeks. And now Donald Trump announced in a tweet yesterday that he will address the nation tonight on television, saying, quote, "I am pleased to inform you," isn't he really, "that I will address the nation," capital A on address. Why? We will never know. "On the humanitarian and national security crisis on our southern border, Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. This is propaganda. This is a propaganda speech. The presidential Oval Office evening address is or should be reserved for actual crises or announcements of consequence. So I disagreed with going to war with Iraq, but I didn't disagree with the use of the Oval Office nighttime address for George W. Bush to communicate that on his orders, bombings had started in Iraq in a lead up to our occupation there. When President Obama announced that Osama bin Laden had been killed, although it wasn't at the Oval Office, it was an evening presidential address, a short one from the White House. So what Donald Trump is doing is he is holding hostage the imagery of the big presidential announcement on national television to lie and to tell us that this non-existent immigration crisis is a crisis when it's not. And that gets us to the networks and the TV channels who are complicit by covering it if they don't live fact check, which I hope that they will, because he's going to lie his ass off. And this is where I'm thinking of doing a live stream tonight during which I will live fact check Donald Trump's predicted to be 8-minute statement to the American people. The reality is, of course, that border crossing attempts are at historic lows and have been declining since before Donald Trump came into office. So the idea that border crossings are down merely because people are scared of Trump. That's not true. We have a net outflow of undocumented immigrants to Mexico rather than coming in from Mexico. Undocumented immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than American-born citizens. They pay into social welfare programs that they're never going to get benefits out of. The agriculture and restaurant industries, just to name two, would be crippled without undocumented immigrants, and of course, without documented immigrants. There is no crisis, but ABC and CBS and NBC and Fox Network and Fox News and CNN and MSNBC, they are all going to be carrying the speech. So Donald Trump is successfully commandeering television for a pet project waste of money that he has concocted. I'll remind you, because it's not just about evaluating how networks will cover tonight's address, but it's also about the hypocrisy that is there in their decision to air it at all. When President Obama wanted to address the nation about executive actions on immigration, many major networks said, we're not going to air it because it's, quote, overtly political. A fake border crisis, possibly culminating in Trump declaring a national emergency in order to get money for his wall, is the most political way I can imagine of dealing with the issue. And we will see, Pat, how these channels deal with it. I would rather them not air it at all and later tell us what was said and the truth or falsity of it. If they're going to do it, they should live fact check. I don't know if they will.
For a few hours yesterday, there was a question over whether the networks would air the speech. And I was really hoping that they would decide not to, because it's so overtly political and because there's no real crisis at the border. But CBS decided to air it, and then the other networks followed suit. I hope that at least like CNN does that live side-by-side fact check thing. They did a similar thing with Sarah Huckabee Sanders at a press conference. At least do that, or give Pelosi, Schumer, and the Democrats equal time to give their side of things.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that, the equal time idea, on today's bonus show. And I'll mention right before tweeting about the address, which we were told again will last 8 minutes, Trump tweeted that the news media are crazed lunatics and the enemy of the people. And now that same news media is doing Trump's bidding. So I may do a YouTube live stream and I will live fact check if so. My hope is that the address in the history books will be seen as historians as a turning point and a major political mistake. We'll see about that. I could not wait to get back into the studio for today's show, partially because we're off to the best new member start of the year, 213 new members in the first 6 days of January so far. By far our best start ever in a new year. Partially, I couldn't wait to get back in the studio today because the YouTube channel, despite it being January, which is usually the worst month of the year, is already on track to surpass 2018 by 30%, even without any more growth throughout the year. But it wasn't just self-serving stuff. I also couldn't wait to get back into the studio today because it was a huge news weekend, starting with the news that Robert Mueller's Trump-Russia investigation has been extended, potentially by up to 6 additional months. Now, why is this huge? It's huge because Trump and his defenders have been telling us for more than a year now that this thing is almost over. Forget for a second that they said it would never get going, right? Forget for a second that they said no one would ever be indicted, no one would be convicted, no one would go to prison. Those ships have already sailed over the horizon. But remember that starting last Thanksgiving, and by that I mean Thanksgiving 2017, okay, not 2018, they were saying Mueller will be done by Christmas 2017. Mueller will be done by January 2018. Mueller will be done by summer 2018, Thanksgiving 2018, Christmas 2018, and then we were told right after the new year, 2019, Mueller's going to be done. Well, we learned over the weekend that the Mueller grand jury has been extended by a period up to 6 months, meaning the investigation could go on up to 6 more months, if not longer. Now, the actual duration may vary depending on how much more work there is to do. And what I mean by that is the grand jury was initially 18 months. It's now been extended for up to a 6-month period. If Mueller just needs another month, then this would just cover that additional month and then it could end. But whatever the time is, this has been extended and we should expect many more indictments because it is the extension of a grand jury. Indictments, of course, so far include Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort. and Rick Gates, Konstantin Kilimnik, I never know how to pronounce his last name, 12 Russian military intelligence officers, 13 Russians, and 3 Russian companies. And remember that Michael Cohen's indictment was actually for a separate case, not the Mueller investigation per se. We're still expecting indictments for Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi, possibly Donald Trump Jr., and who knows at this point how much further this will go. And it's really important to understand that when this decision is made by a judge to extend a grand jury beyond 18 months, they are looking at whether the extension is in the interest of the public. And a judge looked at everything and decided that despite the fact that they've already had 18 months of this grand jury, it is indeed in the public interest for the grand jury to be extended. And I am just shocked, Pat, that Rudy Giuliani wasn't telling us the truth when he said time and time again that this thing was almost over.
Yeah. I mean, my rational mind says that this is a good thing because it'll give Mueller more time and we can really get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, and potentially we'll see more indictments because of it. But on the other side, I kind of want it to wrap up. I want to see what happened. I want to hear what Mueller's findings are. And I guess we'll just have to be patient. But by the time 6 months is up, that's going to be 2 full years of an investigation. Maybe the country is getting tired of it.
Well, it's not. I mean, here's the thing. Politics aside, country getting tired and fatigued aside, this isn't shocking. Watergate went on for years. This is a massive undertaking. You're looking at criminality across multiple countries, across all levels of the organization that was Donald Trump running for president. And, every time that we hear it's almost over, we have to remember, wait a second, how would anyone know that? Mueller has been running one of the tightest ships, no leaks, one of the most professionally run investigations of its kind. When we actually learn what's going on, it's either because, number one, there are court documents filed which we can read, or number two, judges or other parties confirm that something happened, like this grand jury extension, which was confirmed by the judge. Every single supposed leak that Trumpists have pushed out about what's about to happen has fallen flat because Mueller is not taking any of this. He's not participating in this news and gossip complex that so often pervades these things. When we found out that one of his investigators was sending inappropriately biased texts, that individual was immediately dismissed. This is a Republican special counsel who has run an airtight ship. The Trumpists still want to defame and malign him. And I hope people are ready for 2019 because it's going to be an absolutely massive year politically. Okay, due to a combination of stupidity and lack of technical knowledge, I guess I would say, Paul Manafort's own lawyers have completely blown the door open on Russian collusion. And we now have, for the first time, thanks to Manafort's lawyers, we have a Trump campaign official confirming their intent to collude with Russia on the 2016 election, and they actually did so. This story is so incredible in the ignorance and stupidity that it exposes that it almost stretches credulity that this has even happened, but it happened, and I'm going to explain it to you today. You'll remember that Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, has been convicted of all sorts of crimes. This happened last year. Now his lawyers are saying that he is really not doing well physically or psychologically in prison, and that is now being brought to a court's attention. But what you may remember is that he has done a lot of bad things. Not only did he commit a bunch of crimes for which he was convicted, he got himself into more trouble because after making a cooperation agreement with Robert Mueller's prosecutors, he lied even more, which is a violation of the plea agreement. His lawyers responded to that claim, as lawyers do, but they messed up big time because what Manafort's lawyers tried to do was to put out a filing that redacted 4 sections in their filing and blacked them out. And we're actually putting up just one page of this filing, and people can see on screen right now that the court filing has a bunch of different lines that are blacked out, redacted, so to speak, except they didn't do it correctly. And even though in the image we have up on the screen, a bunch of text is blacked out, it looks redacted, this was done in such a way that if you merely highlighted that blacked out text, copied it, and then pasted it into another document on your computer in Microsoft Word or in WordPad or Notepad. It pasted the full unredacted text of what was covered up, meant to be covered up. An incredible mistake. And the real blockbuster isn't the ignorant lawyers, technically ignorant lawyers of Paul Manafort. It's the content of what they tried to redact, because the redacted text says that Manafort lied to Mueller about meeting Konstantin Kilimnik during the 2016 campaign, specifically to talk about the, quote, Ukraine peace plan, which is code for the Trump administration's softening on U.S. policy towards Russia for their actions in Ukraine. Kilimnik is connected to Russian intelligence. So this is a document not from Christopher Steele, not from Democratic operatives. This is a document from Manafort's own attorneys, which confirms that the campaign chairman of the Republican nominee for president, who eventually became the president, met with a Russian intelligence agent, met with an individual connected to Russian intelligence during the campaign, specifically to discuss what would Republican policy be towards Russia and Ukraine, and to share polling data with that same Russian individual. The document confirms collusion. Now remember, collusion in and of itself is not a crime. If Donald Trump knew that this was going on, that would be conspiracy, and it would potentially be obstruction of justice, depending on how Donald Trump answered those questions in writing to Robert Mueller. And there's a whole bunch of possible crimes that are connected to what is admitted here in this faulty redaction of Paul Manafort's document. Remember how Russian actors ran those targeted campaigns to try to influence the election, and one of the things they did was target voters in specific parts of the United States in certain ways, and in other parts of the United States in other ways? Kilimnik is a business associate of Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, who has been tied into influence campaigns. And by the way, the Trump administration decided to lift sanctions on Deripaska. He's connected to the guy Manafort was meeting with. So this has been blown wide open, Pat, by Manafort's own lawyers.
Yeah, these people are criminals, but they're not criminal masterminds. And contrary to popular belief, they do not have the best people working for them. If you want to get away with a crime as serious as colluding with a foreign power to win an election, you have to be smart about it. You have to outsmart the FBI and make sure that you cover your tracks. It doesn't really look like they did that in this case.
Yes, and of course, collusion, again, not in and of itself a crime, but the entire conspiracy to do this and the cover-up is what may contain a whole bunch of different criminality, and this certainly makes that case far, far stronger. Trump's campaign manager, while campaign manager, Paul Manafort, provided to the Russians during the campaign, remember, data that they then used to target voters in specific states to help Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton. The only remaining link that we would be looking for now is that Trump knew this was going on. That would involve him in a criminal conspiracy with Russia to seize the presidency. This didn't get the attention it deserves because of, surprise, surprise, Trump's bogus border wall immigration crisis primetime address last night. Maybe by design, maybe not, who really knows? But every single box is being checked. Slowly but surely, take any one of these issues, take any of the allegations that have surfaced over time, and what at first is a question mark, slowly but surely becomes a definitive piece of knowledge about what it is that took place. Every single box being checked. Imagine what we will know in 6 months or by the end of 2019. Absolutely stunning. And unfortunately, again, because of the timing of Trump's border wall address last night, this should have gotten a lot more attention. And there's some complexity in it. You have to understand not only what was the court filing, but why is it relevant that Manafort admitted to having lied to Mueller about his meetings with Kilimnik and how Kilimnik is related. Right? You need to understand a bunch of stuff. It's much more interesting to corporate media to say Trump addressing the country about the border wall crisis. Way easier, probably better ratings for them as well. Follow this story and other stories from today's show on the David Pakman Show Instagram page at David Pakman Show. And while you're there, follow me as well. I'm on Instagram at david.pakman.